The kind of woman Judy Scott is, a magnanimous person, willing to forgive the man who shot and killed her son and said, I hope he finds Jesus.
They're a very religious family, the Scott family. In fact, Judy Scott mentioned how Walter Scott went to church all the time. They all dressed up for church, went every Sunday, and she has a big heart to be able to do that. But they all said, Bill, this will change their lives forever, the whole Scott family. And it'll change Slager's family's lives also forever, too.
Harv, when you take an overview of this week, we've been here since Monday. We've been here Tuesday. We were here yesterday, Wednesday. We're here today. When you take an overview of what we've seen here at the federal courthouse in Charleston, what thoughts do you come away with?
Well, I think there's a lot of decorum in the courtroom this week, that's for sure. There were no outbursts. In fact, when Judge Norton handed down the sentence, there was no outbursts in the courtroom. So people are behaving, and I think Charleston will behave as a result of this. You know, there was talk what's going to happen after the sentence is going to come down. Judge Norton said nobody's going to be happy with the sentence. The Slager family won't be happy. The Scott family won't be happy. But then again, Bill, look at the streets. No problems right now around us. Take a look.
Well, but there are a lot of cops around here, too, making sure that there is order on Meeting Street where the courthouse is downtown. But as Harv said, there are no problems out there right now. We hope it stays that way. A big victory, as you pointed out today, for the prosecution when the judge said, no, this is not manslaughter, as the defense wanted. The defense said, this is voluntary manslaughter. Judge David Norton said, no, I don't think so. This is second-degree murder.
And you have to remember, yesterday, during the testimony, Judge Norton said, it sounds to me like the taser was on Slager's right side, right, as the prosecution said. Andy Savage, his people said it was on the left side to try to show that it was grabbed by Walter Scott. So in essence, Judge Norton agreed with the prosecution. And at that point, I started thinking, wait a minute, maybe he's going to lean towards the way he wound up leaning.
And as you said, too, Harv, the sentencing guidelines for second-degree murder are 19 to 25 years. He got just above the minimum. He got 20 years in federal prison, and I guess he starts serving immediately, does he not? He gets evaluated first?
They will evaluate him. We don't know which prison he will go to. It'll be minimum security, medium security. You got to remember he's a police officer, or was a police officer. So the question is, will they isolate him like they did in the Charleston County Jail? You know, he had his own cell not far down the road from
for his own protection.
For his own protection, down the road from Dillon Roof. So the question is, will they, isolate him in federal prison? Will he be in the general population? That's yet to be determined. But he will not be close to South Carolina, I believe. I think I heard Judge Norton say, or Andy Savage say, he'll be at least 500 miles away from here, possibly.
We're awaiting a news conference any moment now with Walter Scott's family. Usually Rodney talks, his brother Anthony talks, and sometimes the mother, God bless her soul, Judy talks. And as soon as that news conference starts, we will break in and let you hear and see what they're saying. They aren't here yet. Is there any indication, Harv, that members of Michael Slager's family might also talk to us? You know, the father, Tom, has been amenable in the past to talking to the media, at least off camera. Do you get any sense that anybody for Michael Slager might be talking?
I'd be very surprised. They didn't talk after the mistrial and the state trial, the hung jury. I honestly doubt it. We would like to hear from them. You know, we heard from them in the courtroom. Of course, we can't show you what they said because it's federal court. Cameras aren't allowed. But I'd be very surprised. I do know Pastor Dixon from the coalition's here. I think Elder Johnson from NAN is here. I think those.
Ed Bryant, I saw him for the North Charleston NAACP president is here as well. And I also saw Charleston State Representative Wendell Gilliard, and he issued an interesting statement today. He said, in essence, there are no winners today. There is sadness for both families, certainly for Walter Scott's family because they lost a father, a son, a brother, but also for Michael Slager's family as well, because the Slager family will have to live for the rest of their lives with what Michael Slager did when he shot and killed Walter Scott.
And Michael Slager has a young child, of course, we've got to remember,
who is now about 2.5 years old, a little older than that, and, you know, he will not see much of his young son, and there's some sadness there, too.
Yeah, well, and I think there are no winners in this situation, as the judge said, and all the Scott family members said this was a case of a cop who made a bad decision. And he made a bad decision that day, obviously.
Why do you think Judge Norton decided Why do you think Judge Norton decided this was a case of second-degree murder first as opposed to voluntary manslaughter, which is what the defense was hoping for?
Bill, I think he was convinced by the testimony. Obviously, he heard the prosecution and their witnesses, and I think that's what swayed him, definitely. I don't think he had his mind made up before this, but it came down to, who said what, and I think he believed what the prosecution said. It wasn't... It didn't seem like, I don't think Michael Slager woke up that day saying, I'm going to go kill somebody, kill Walter Scott. But by the same token, Judge Norton decided this was not the heat of passion. He just went ahead and too many shots. Too many shots, Bill.
8 shots, 5 actually hit Walter Scott, most of them in the back. The sad news is, Debbie, and I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions because I know you do. The sad news is this all started over a broken taillight, which is worth about $1.70 in the hardware store or the car store. So $1.70 taillight led to all of this tragedy with the shooting death of Walter Scott. Debbie, I'll throw it back to you. I know you've got some questions.
I sure do, Bill. I know that you mentioned yesterday that the talk around the courthouse, the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston, was that Michael Slager would probably get what the pre-probation recommendations were, which were 10 to 12, 13 years, and he's apparently now getting twice as much time. I have a question for Harv. Harv, you were watching the courtroom when Judge Norton said this morning that he felt that it was first-degree murder and not manslaughter, or rather second degree. What was the reaction in the courtroom? Because obviously they know that the points for the sentencing guidelines increase the time.
Debbie, I was not in the courtroom. I was in the media room, but I can tell you I didn't hear any gasp or anything like that. It was quiet. I think Alexis Simmons was in the courtroom when that happened. She'll be down shortly and tell you. But there were no outbursts today. The only outbursts were during the impact statements. Miss Scott, Judy Scott, got very emotional. So did some of the Scott brothers. They got emotional. But there was no outburst at all when the judge said a second-degree murder.
I think, Debbie, a lot of people were acting on the assumption that this would be ruled as voluntary manslaughter and not as second-degree murder. Well, the guidelines for voluntary manslaughter are 10 to 12 and a half years. But the judge says this isn't a voluntary manslaughter. This is second-degree murder, and the guidelines for that are now 19 to 25. He gave him 1 year beyond the minimum, gave him 20 years in federal prison. So that's what we know about Michael Slager. He's now going off. He'll be evaluated, and then somewhere in the country he'll start serving his time. 20 years. And Harv, you told me just a minute ago that you believe 20 years in the federal system means 20 years to be served by Michael Slager. No parole.
There's no parole. There is supervised release after he gets out of prison. I believe the judge said 2 to 5 years on that. Also, Bill, I need to point out, Judge Norton also said he was guilty of obstruction of justice, lying to the authorities after the shooting.
And specifically when you talk about obstruction of justice, that comes where Michael Slager reportedly took the taser and placed it down by Walter Scott's body and then picked it back up. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, Bill, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think he did place that taser next to the body. We've seen that video so many times. In fact, one of the Scott family members said it bothered him so much he saw it thousands of times, played over and over and over.
That was Rodney Scott who said that.
He said he saw his brother killed thousands of times, referring to the video being played over and over and over.
But that's where the obstruction of justice comes in, with the planting of the taser by Walter Scott's body. Debbie, some more questions.
I do have a question. We were all caught off guard by how quickly Judge David Norton issued this sentence for the former police officer Michael Slager. What was the reaction in the courtroom? I know, Harv, you were watching from the media room. Bill, what were people saying there at the courthouse?
Well, we scrambled, Debbie. We, quite frankly, didn't anticipate it coming quite this early. We thought Judge Norton was going to have a lunch break and then come back and say, well, I've thought about all the evidence. I've thought hard about this. Here's what I'm going to decide. It came down quickly right after the last impact witness testified. Then, bam, he made his ruling. What was the feeling inside the media room and inside the courtroom from what you could see?
Bill, I got up there just in time for the sentencing. I was down here doing a live report with you, as you know, and I got up there, and the minute I got up there, the judge was speaking, and he gave the sentence just like that. So he just wanted to get this thing over. I think he had his mind made up last night, if not sooner than that, to be honest with you.
So we were all shocked it came down so quickly today. We were anticipating this, of course, Debbie, much earlier in the week. But Judge Norton heard the victim impact statements from both sides of the two families, first from Walter Scott's family, then from Michael Slager's family, and after that, bam, he made his ruling. 20 years in the federal penitentiary for Michael Slager. Were you surprised by that 20 years once Judge David Norton said, no, this is second-degree murder, it's not manslaughter? Were you surprised at the 20 years?
No. Bill, once he said second-degree murder, I knew right away it was going to be in between that 19 and 25, so he chose 20. And again, Judge Norton, before sentencing, said he has the best job in the world, a federal judge, but he said the worst part of that job is when he has to sentence somebody because not everybody's going to be happy.
Once again, Debbie, we're awaiting the news conference by the family of Walter Scott. We anticipate that Rodney Scott will certainly be here. He's Walter's younger brother, as will Anthony Scott, another brother, and perhaps Judy Scott. She has been at some other news conferences with her two sons. So as soon as that news conference starts, we'll break away and listen to what they have to say about the verdict. 20 years in the federal pen for Michael Slager. Debbie?
Both families have been through so much, especially during the state trial. Many of us were there following that, covering that report. We are going to talk again about the 20 years for the former North Charleston police officer Michael Slager. He will be serving 20 years in federal prison for the shooting death of Walter Scott. That happened on Saturday, April 4th, 2015. Then police officer Michael Slager in North Charleston pulled over Walter Scott on the morning of that Saturday, April 4th, for a broken taillight. As Bill mentioned, $1 or so that taillight costing. Dash cam video showing the men talking before Scott gets out of his car and takes off. According to the police report, Scott did not comply with the officer's commands, and then he tried to grab Slager's stun gun. That's according to the police report. A widely circulated video taken by a bystander, Faden Santana, shows Scott running away as Slager raises his gun, firing, hitting Scott 5 times. Some of those shots hit Scott in the back. The video sent to the state law enforcement division and the New York Times, and it went viral. Many of you have watched this video. Tuesday, April 7th of 2015, North Charleston authorities announced Slager was being charged with murder. Then in June 8th of 2015, the solicitor, Scarlett Wilson, announced that a state grand jury had indicted the former police officer for murder. In May of 2016, he was indicted by a federal grand jury on civil rights charges for use of a weapon during a violent crime, as well as obstruction of justice. In October 31st, 2016, jury selection began for the state murder trial. On December 5th, 2016, almost 1 year ago, a little over a year ago, the trial ended in a mistrial. The jury could not reach a verdict following 22 hours of deliberation. The judge declared a mistrial on the 4th day of deliberations in that murder trial. Then this past May 2nd of 2017, nearly a year after being indicted, Slager pleaded guilty to federal charges to drop state murder charges. November 17th of this year, sentencing hearing set for December 4th of 2017, this past December. The maximum penalty of the offense, the agreement stating, would be a prison term of up to life in prison, a fine of up to $250,000, and 5 years of supervised release. There was no mandatory minimum prison sentence or a minimum fine. We're going to go back to
Mrs. Scott have been celebrated all around the world, but they are just ordinary people who believe in the Lord God and trusted Him to bring justice for their son. I think they would say, if it was not all that they wanted, it was certainly more than they were told they would get. Because in America, the question was, do Black Lives Matter? For one day in South Carolina, the answer was, yes, they do. Thank you.
comment that you all have on the length of sentence, and I'm not sure if you already said anything about that.
20 years? Yeah, we talked about how in South Carolina we were not expecting life. Some of us didn't even expect time because that's been the history and the tradition. So for us, or at least for me, I said that if the family is satisfied with 20 years, then I am. But we have to be honest that it was more than we thought. He finally will get to serve some real time for a real crime. That doesn't ever happen in South Carolina. Very seldom does a police officer get sentenced to any amount of time for taking the life of a black person who's innocent and is found to be innocent by the actions. So in South Carolina now we can at least say the police officers of South Carolina are now on notice. If you take the life of an innocent person, then you can and should expect to serve time. That happened. 20 years was more than I expected, but for 20 years, Walter Scott will still not be here. Slager has a life after 20 years. Slager can go back to his family after 20 years. We were so offended by some of what was said, even by Slager's father, when he brought up Mr. Scott's past, as though his past had anything to do with him being killed that day. Slager didn't know any of that when he shot him. He didn't know anything about Walter Scott when he shot him. He just knew what he looked like. So for his father to bring that up was outrageous, but the family pressed on through that. Walter Scott was not killed because of his past. He was killed because of his present. And the officer was held responsible because of what he did to Walter Scott, regardless of who anybody thought Mr. Scott was. We know what he was. We know who he is. And because of that, we always thought that if truth crushed the earth will rise again, Walter Scott's killer will be brought to justice. And today, at least that did happen.
What's your name and affiliation?
I'm Reverend Nelson B. Rivers III. I'm with the National Action Network, Vice President of our National Religious Affairs Department. I'm also a pastor here at Charity Missionary Baptist Church. I work with Elder Johnson, Ms. Grant, and Pastor Dixon, and Representative Gilliard, and all the justice work we have to do. I'm from here. I grew up in Rutledge Avenue, and so sometimes they wonder where we're from. I went to Burke High School. I've been dealing with the police in this community for a long time. I've been beat up with them by a long time. And I can tell you without fear of contradiction, this is a shocking but good day. Yes. A police officer has been brought to justice in Charleston, South Carolina. Hallelujah, there's a God somewhere.
Yep. Amen.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, there you heard from Reverend Nelson Rivers from the National Action Network. He said 20 years was more than they expected. He did not expect to have Michael Slager spend any time behind bars, and he said this doesn't happen in South Carolina. He was surprised but very happy with the 20 years that was handed by Judge David Norton. He said, asked, do Black Lives Matter in South Carolina? And he said, in one day, we see, yes, they do. He also said that the sentence indicated that police officers are now on notice that what can happen here. Again, he said they were not expecting a life sentence, which Michael Slager could have gotten. He said that they did not expect any time, that they thought he would get off completely. But Michael Slager will spend 20 years behind bars, sentenced this morning or this afternoon by Judge David Norton. Once again, those statements from Reverend Nelson Rivers, head of the National Action Network. Reverend Rivers is a longtime advocate, civil rights advocate here in the Low Country. We'll go back to the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston to Bill Sharp and Harv Jacobs. Bill, Harv?
Yeah, Debbie, one of the comments that really got to me was from Walter Scott's youngest son, Miles. He testified, he broke down, by the way, on the witness stand, understandably talking about his father. And he said yesterday on the witness stand, you know, my father will never see me play football in high school. My father will never see me graduate. I cry myself to sleep thinking about my father. I'll never bring him back. That was Miles Scott, the youngest son of Walter Scott. What really got to you? What statement in court or comment by a family member hit you, Harv, hard?
Judy Scott, Bill. I mean, she is so emotional. She's a God-fearing woman, a real Christian. And it really got to me when she forgave Michael Slager. She was in tears. She forgave him and said, I hope you repent, and I hope you let Jesus into your life. That's what got to me.
She's got a big heart. Let's get Elder James Johnson with the National Action Network in here. Good to see you. And also State Representative Wendell Gilliard. Representative Gilliard, good to have both of you with us. All right, Elder Johnson, you and I were talking with Representative Gilliard yesterday. None of us thought that Michael Slager would get 20 years in prison. We all thought it was going to be less. What's your reaction now, Elder Johnson?
Well, it's a sad day for me, Tears coming to my eye for both families, and nobody wins in this. 20 years is a long time to be away from a family. But, justice must prevail in this case. But this sends a strong message across America today that a police officer killing a black man, it does matter. And those families out there who have lost loved ones and police officers got off, I'm pretty sure they are rooting for this victory here today. And I hope this will stop, Bill, the killing of an unarmed black man.
So in this case, Elder Johnson, it looks like black lives do matter.
Black lives do matter. And it does send a strong message out through this country. Very few police officers get convicted for killing a black man. Right. Here in Charleston and in the state of South Carolina, it happened. And in the deep South, and it sends a strong message across this country. 20
years in federal prison. Charleston State Representative Wendell Gilliard. Representative Gilliard, thank you for joining us, too. Yes. What's your reaction? 20 years in prison for Michael Slager.
Well, the bottom line is, our hearts went out to both sides.
Both families,
Both families, okay? And we've been through tragedies like this before in the state of South Carolina. What I'm taking away after 4 days of coming down here is the fact that here in South Carolina, we have work to do. We've turned our back. We've gone back to business as usual. When you look at this whole scenario around this case here, what has happened right before our eyes, a man has lost his life based on the color of his skin. And that's not the way it works in America. It should never be that way, okay?
You're talking about Walter Scott.
Talking about Walter Scott. And if we're going to go silent and turn our back, then we're all guilty, okay? If we don't participate in education, in our communities, for the progression, the betterment of our society, then we're all guilty. That's the lesson I'm taking away from here today. I want everybody to understand that. Even when I go back to Columbia, I have to present the fact that we have more work to do when it comes to race relations here in the state of South Carolina.
Now, I know Harv Jacobs, our police reporter, has some questions for both of you gentlemen. So, Harv, you go ahead.
Wendell, I noticed that Rodney Scott said if anything good came out of this was the body cameras, because and you were very instrumental with that. So, where do we go from here with that?
When I first introduced the body camera, one thing that I understood, that was not to be a solve-all. Okay, people have to understand that. The problem is we have the lack of participation in government when it comes to bettering our society. Okay, so the only persons we have to blame is ourselves. Okay, not only our leaders, but our citizens also. Because if we keep going back to business as usual, then I can almost predict to you it's going to be another tragedy and another tragedy after that. And every time a tragedy happens, the first reaction we get is, oh, let's all come together. Well, my question is, how many times are we going to come together? How many times are we going to hold hands and pray? No, let's get out here and let's get committed. Let's get involved. If you're out here to make a change, then you are to stand up on the truth. And the only way you're going to do that is by being committed and making change for the better.
I got a quick question for Elder Johnson, if I can. You've been a critic of the police department, Elder Johnson. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How is this going to change the North Charleston Police Department and other police departments, the sentence?
Well, that's sending a strong message across America about a police officer can be convicted for killing a black person. Here in North Charleston, we hope that North Charleston come together and work with all the civil rights leaders here, that we don't see this again. I want to commend State Representative Gilliard on the body cams. The body cams need to be named the Walter Scott cam, simply because it didn't fit Walter Scott death. North Charleston probably wouldn't even have the body cam right now. So hopefully this sends a strong message. And we know after Walter Scott's death that police all across the country got body cams put on their uniforms. So this is a tragedy, but some positive came out of it.
Nelson Rivers III is with the National Action Network. He joins us now, too. Reverend Rivers, it's good to have you with us. What is your reaction? 20 years in federal prison for Michael Slager. Is it a just sentence?
Well, I think the family will tell us whether they think it's just. But I can say from where I stand, being from Charleston, I never thought I'd see a white police officer given 20 years for killing a black man. That's history. And it's ironic that when it happened, Reverend Sharpton said, well, we were in New York when the mayor fired Slager. We said maybe South Carolina, as bad as it is, will be the beacon of light that shows others how to take care of this business. So it's been a long time. Walter Scott is still dead. 20 years from now, he will still be dead. And so it's not equivalent that Walter Scott's family and Slager's family are going through, because what Slager's family will go through can end one day, but not Walter Scott. He's gone forever. And so the 20 years should have been done. I didn't expect life. To be honest, Bill, I didn't expect 20 years because in South Carolina, police officers just don't get sentenced for killing black people. So the message now has been sent that if you take the life of an innocent person, regardless of who he or she is, you can go to jail. That should have always been the case, but it always has not been the case. So we're glad about that. So I'm waiting to hear from Mrs. Scott and Mr. Scott, Rodney and Anthony and the family, to see what they think, and those sons. The son who made that powerful statement. He not only humanized his father, he made a lie.
You're talking about Miles now, the young son?
Exactly. He made a lie out of what they tried to paint Walter Scott as. Mm-hmm. We have people here who went to school with Brother Scott. They knew him well. So it's a historic day because in South Carolina, I think your records will check, and Harv probably has it already in his catalytic memory, that we don't have a cataloging memory. We don't have a time that a police officer in modern history has been found guilty and sent to prison for taking the life of a black person.
Reverend Nelson Rivers, thank you for your comments. Elder Johnson, thank you. Representative Gilliard, thank you all for coming out here. Debbie, I'm going to throw it back to you. Let me quickly here before we do. I'll throw it back to you, Debbie.
Interesting community reaction on the sentencing of police officer Michael Slager. You have heard from several leaders of the black community here in the Low Country, and I'm going to read to you some of what they had to say. Reverend Nelson Rivers, he is from the National Action Network. You heard from him first. He said 20 years was a lot more than they expected. In fact, they didn't think that Michael Slager would be given any time at all behind bars. But he said, do Black Lives Matter? In one day, we see, yes, they do here in South Carolina. He says they were not expecting life at all. In fact, he said they were not expecting any time at all. He never thought he would see a white police officer sentenced for killing a black man. But Michael Slager has been handed 20 years. He'll spend 20 years in federal prison. Reverend Rivers said police officers are now on notice across America. If you take a life, you will go to jail. But then he added that in 20 years, Michael Slager will be out of jail, but Walter Scott will still be no longer with us here in the Low Country. Elder James Johnson said it was a very sad day for both sides, but he also said it sends a strong message all across America. He said, I hope this stops the killing of unarmed black men. We're going to go back to the federal courthouse live downtown, joining Bill Sharp and Harv Jacobs. Bill?
Debbie, any moment now, we anticipate the Scott family will come out and tell us their reaction to the sentencing of Michael Slager to 20 years. Mark Strassman is here with us right now. He is covering this for CBS News. Mark, you've been here all week. What's your overview of what you've seen?
Well, today in particular, I was struck by one thing, which is I don't know if these victim impact statements made a difference in how the judge was thinking. I do think, as I sat there in court, that it made a difference to Judy Scott, the mother, and to Michael Slager, the defendant. I think it was important for Slager to hear Judy Scott say that she forgave him. I think it was important for Judy Scott to hear that he took responsibility for what happened. It was, I think, probably the first time that each of them had heard from the other. And it really was striking what a tragedy it was for both families. That Slager's family said what a good guy he was, how he devoted his life to service.
Right.
And in one terrible moment on a Saturday morning, a day before Easter, both families' lives changed, and in terrible ways.
What really struck you the most, Mark? What hit you the hardest in terms of people taking the witness stand and talking about how this affected their lives? I've already told you that Miles Scott, the youngest son of Walter Scott, cried on the stand and said, "Dad will never see me graduate from high school. He'll never see me play football. I cry myself to sleep." So for me, it was probably Miles Scott. What about for you?
That's a really good question. I was struck by Miles too. That kid's life is one of many in that courtroom that'll be changed forever. At the same time, Slager has an infant son who's never going to get to know his father either. It's just, I find myself just imagine being put in the position of that family. I have a brother who's a police officer.
Right.
Worry about him too. It's a dangerous job. But let's face it, when the judge said today that it was murder too, and there was an obstruction of justice charge,
right,
he was sending a message when he sentenced him to 20 years that Walter Scott's life mattered. And that's the bottom line. His life, every life matters, and that's what you saw justice today.
So in this case, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, but certainly Walter Scott's life, as it represents Black Lives Matter. And look, I was in Ferguson. Ferguson did not go well on a number of levels. Charleston was remarkable in the way that it was calm. The Scott family sent out a message: we do not want disturbances. To them, the fact that Slager was arrested quickly gave them hope that justice would prevail, which was important.
Right.
And now when we hear from the Scotts, and Anthony Scott, as he said in court today, was the last member of the family to forgive Slager, as he acknowledged.
But he did.
He did. But he also has said that he wanted life for Slager. That's what he thought justice would be. It'll be interesting to hear him say today, now that he has forgiven Slager, whether 20 years is enough.
Mark Strassman, thank you so much. Always good to hear from you and good to follow you on CBS.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
I have a question for you. Come on back in here. We're awaiting the Scott family, Walter Scott's family, for comment about their reaction to the sentence of 20 years in prison. I have been struck by the magnanimity of the mother, Judy Scott, the forgiveness in her soul, not just now, but throughout his state trial, when it ended in a mistrial. She has been a gracious woman. She has forgiven Michael Slager for killing her son. And she said in court today, as you noticed, I hope he finds Jesus. And that really hit me hard. What about you?
Hit me hard too, Bill. I'm Christian myself, and she's a very, very strong religious woman. The family, they're all strong Christians. And imagine what they've been going through for 2 years, Bill. April 2015. Right. They said it changed their lives forever. Their lives will never be the same. It became an international story. As Rodney Scott said, it's become global now. He got thousands of phone calls from people after this happened. The body camera legislation nationwide happened because of the Walter Scott shooting. So it's a big tragedy, but it's had, in a good way, it had some ramifications with the body cameras, and I want to see how police react to this. That's another good. I hope we can get to talk to the police, that they'll come out and talk to us, all agencies in the Tri-County area. How will they react to the sentence? Will they change the way they operate? Will they change the way they think when they're stopping a suspect, chasing a suspect? Right. A traffic stop, Bill, all my cop buddies tell me it's the most dangerous part of a police officer's job because you never know what's going to go on. But look how this one ended up.
And look how it did end up. Elder Johnson, come here quickly for a second. Elder Johnson is with the National Action Network. Elder Johnson, Harv and I were talking a minute ago. Mm-hmm. One of the real tragedies for us, and perhaps for you too, is this all started over a broken taillight that would cost you about $1.70 at the store to get fixed. So because of a broken taillight, for the price of $1.70, we've lost a man's life. And two families have, in essence, if not been destroyed, heavily damaged by what happened.
That's exactly right. And hopefully North Charleston and our police department will change that. If they're going to stop somebody for a taillight out, what they can do is now just let them know over loudspeaker your taillights are out, right, instead of stopping it. But a man have died because of $1.87. You know, and it's a tragedy. You know, all over America, young black males are being stopped simply because they look for those things like a broken tail lights, brake lights not working. Sometimes it is working. They just want to erase your profile, these people, and end up in tragedy. But I want to thank Judge Norton, I think that's his name, Norton.
Judge David Norton, right.
David Norton, for the rule of law. He did a great job.
He followed the rules of law.
Yes, he did.
And he followed the guidelines. He
exactly.
gave him, as you know, Elder Johnson, 1 year above the minimum. The guideline was 19 to 25.
Really?
He gave him 20.
20? Well, I appreciate that. And that's sent a strong message, especially in federal court, to people, a police officer who wants to kill an unarmed black person.
Got you. Nelson Rivers, could you come over here a quick second? Harv, I know you've got some questions for Nelson Rivers, also with the National Action Network. Go ahead, Harv.
Nelson, do you think that this sentence is going to change the way police departments operate?
I think it has to. Now that you know that you can get real jail time for doing a real crime, which has not always been the case in this state, I think that police departments ought to be proactive. Although they're being reactive now, they ought to be proactive before the next one happens. And say we will adjust and change our training. One of the things that has to happen is that this us versus those hoodlums, those animals, the thingification, as Dr. King called of black people, has to change. And it has to change with leadership, saying that you should treat, if all they said about Michael Slager was true, about the kind of person he was, that he wouldn't have pointed the gun, took the stance, and shot the man in the back 5 times. A truly good person doesn't do that. I mean, think about that. It's one thing if you shoot him, oh my bad, 1 time, or you pull the gun out and it goes off, but he took the stance and shot at him 8 times and hit him 5 times in the back. We were talking yesterday, Harv, you around my age, so you remember we used to watch Cowboys and watch John Wayne and all these macho, mythical people. One of the things that was always most offensive, if you shoot a man in the back, that's the lowest of the low. He shot him in the back.
And Rodney Scott said that. He said when he was a kid, he played Cowboys and Indians. He said the one rule of thumb is you never shoot in the back.
Never shoot a man in the back. And so either you don't think he's a man or you think you can get away with it. What has not been further explored, look at what happened right after Walter was killed. They'd already started to draw a picture of what happened. The frame was on, and Slager would not have done a day if it weren't for Mr. Faden and that video. Let's never diminish the courage. He was amazing on the stand this time. I saw him and heard him. He would not be derailed. He would not be intimidated. And he made it clear, when you're doing what's right, you're willing to accept the consequences. So police departments ought to take this opportunity. North Charleston has a chance now. We ought to get the report on what was found out about the relationship between the community and the police that the federal government has refused to let out, which makes us very suspicious about why won't you release the report.
Will you still push for that report?
We'll continue to push for the report, yes. We'll continue to push for the FOIA request to get it. But I do want to credit them, be honest about it, that when they fired Michael Slager and we were at National Action Network Convention in New York, Reverend Sharpton made the comment that maybe a place like South Carolina, strange as it may sound, can lead the way in the nation for police community reform. Now we have another opportunity. The body camera was done because of Walter. The flag came down because of the Emmanuel 9, all here in South Carolina.
You're going to be preaching Sunday?
Yes, I am, but unfortunately I'm preaching in Atlanta, Georgia. But I am preaching about this in a different kind of way. This is the month that we celebrate the birth of Jesus. He wasn't born in December, but we'll go with it, that we're talking about the birth of a revolutionary.
Gotcha.
This is a part of Jesus' justice ethic, that you cannot be for injustice and truly be a Christian.
If Dr. King were alive today, God rest his soul, if Dr. King came back and heard this verdict, this sentence, 20 years in prison for Michael Slager for shooting Walter Scott, what would he be saying?
He would say that our labor has not been in vain, that the work with the federal government in the marches in 1963, the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, the 68 Fair Housing Act were all done to make sure that the federal government would stand behind and sometimes in front of the states when they wouldn't do what's right. So from that perspective, remember, the state could not get Slager convicted.
Right.
It took a federal trial with federal prosecutors with investigations by the FBI in addition to SLED, to bring this about. Because SLED investigations don't usually result in this. It took federal prosecutors, federal investigators, and a federal trial in the federal courthouse to get this done. From that perspective, Dr. King would say, my labor was not in vain. All he'd ever tried to do was to make sure that African Americans, people of color, get treated like everyone else in America regardless of their race. Walter Scott's killer now knows that Walter Scott's life did matter.
Reverend Rivers, always a pleasure. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Good to have you with us. Thank you.
So once again, Debbie, Harv and I are here with a growing crowd of people waiting for this news conference from the Scott family to hear their reaction to Walter Scott's killer, Michael Slager, getting 20 years in prison. Any idea how you think the family will react? We heard some of that in the courtroom today. They've all, Rodney Scott, the brother, has forgiven Michael Slager for what he did. Anthony Scott, another brother, has forgiven him for what he did. And the mother, Judy Scott, has forgiven Michael Slager for killing her son. What do you think they will be saying at this news conference?
Bill, tell me if this makes sense. I think they will be happy but not satisfied, if that makes sense. Happy that he's going to prison, happy that he got the 20 years, which many people thought he wouldn't get, but not satisfied. I think they would want more. Michael Slager, he's 36, so 56 when he gets out, supervised relief. Walter Scott's not getting out of that grave.
And as you and I have pointed out often throughout our 4 days here, and as Mark Strassman pointed out from CBS just a few minutes ago, this is nobody wins in this. The family of Walter Scott has lost a loved one. He will never be back. Michael Slager's family will have this burden to deal with for the rest of their lives. So it's really it's not a win-win. It's a lose-lose situation for both families.
And Bill, the attorneys on both sides also did a great job. Andy Savage, whom everybody knows, he's a legend in Charleston, really worked very, very hard for Michael Slager. And the federal prosecutor, Jared Fishman, who people don't know about from around here, he specialized in civil rights cases. He was brought in specifically into Charleston to handle this case, and he did an excellent job also.
And in fact, Michael Slager pleaded guilty to violating Walter Scott's civil rights. That was the one charge he agreed to plead guilty to. Everything else against him was dropped.
The most serious charge he pled to, I might say. The most serious charge. Yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. And the judge also said there was an obstruction of justice charge, as he saw it, against Michael Slager for taking that taser, his own taser, and putting it by Walter Scott's dying body after he'd shot him 5 times in the back.
And also lying to the authorities during the interviews with SLED. His stories kept on changing, and the judge said he was lying to SLED, too, when he was interviewed.
So, once again, we're awaiting on that news conference. The crowd out here is growing somewhat. We're anxious to hear what the family of Walter Scott has to say. When that news conference starts, Debbie, we'll bring it to you live here outside the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Bill and Harv. Here with me is our legal analyst, Charlie Condon, former solicitor, Ninth Circuit solicitor here in Charleston, as well as the state attorney general many years here in South Carolina. Your reaction to the sentence today?
I'm surprised but not shocked. Judge Norton made a finding. Again, the finding, let's talk about the evidentiary standard.
Okay.
At the sentencing level here in federal court, it's preponderance of the evidence. If this were a trial on second-degree murder versus manslaughter, in federal court or state court, the proof would be beyond a reasonable doubt, which is much, much higher. But he did make this finding that despite the pre-sentence investigative report saying it's manslaughter, despite the fact that in the state court the jurors said that at most it could be manslaughter, he made a finding that it was second-degree murder with this concept of malice of forethought being present. And so with that finding, it kicked defendant Slager much higher up into the sentencing guideline ranges. Hence this prison sentence of 20 years.
Which essentially doubled the sentence for him because he was facing around 10 to 12 or 13
Correct.
years under the pre-probation recommendation, which, as you said, was under manslaughter.
Yes, they scored it. They said it was manslaughter. The government disagreed. The defense, of course, wanted to accept the manslaughter report. Judge Norton sided with the government. There's no other way to say this. He just determined the probation report was wrong and that he would score it, he would call it second-degree murder.
We just heard Nelson Rivers, I believe, say that it took federal prosecutors to get this accomplished, and obviously there was a mistrial in state court. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't. First of all, in state court, it was prosecuted very vigorously. Mm-hmm. The federal government had a chance to preview and look at the state evidence, and that did result in a non-conviction, but it was a hung jury.
Right.
So I'm fully confident that had not the federal government prosecuted, the state would have re-prosecuted. Typically on a re-prosecution, and I've done this myself personally, you're much sharper, you can narrow down the issues much better. I do think the federal government learned from how the state prosecuted and narrowed their focus, and so I understand what he's maybe contemplating, that but for the federal government there wouldn't have been justice.
Exactly.
But my expectation would have been, if the federal government hadn't been here, there would have been a re-prosecution, a successful one in state court the second time.
All right, we'll go back to the courthouse. You'll stay with us and we'll hear from the family, I understand. Bill?
Here they come. I think they're coming down the street.
Yeah, Debbie, the family is now right behind me. They're coming up here to the microphones for a news conference, and we're just about ready to start right now. We've got Rodney and Anthony. Good to see both of you. And Mrs. Scott is here. They're lawyers. They're coming up to the mics right now. And they will identify themselves first as they talk to us. You can see them right now. Here they go. Mrs. Scott. There's Anthony Scott. Hi, Mrs. Scott. And there's Rodney behind them. Their attorneys are here. You guys go ahead and start now. We're all set.
Family attorneys, L. Chris Stewart of Stewart C. M. Felton. We told y'all that this wasn't over. We told you it wasn't over. Today is a historic day for civil rights, particularly in officer-involved shootings. This is one of the largest sentences ever. Being found guilty of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice is historic. And I hope that the entire nation understands how big this is and what this means for everyone, no matter what color you are. This is all people crave, is accountability. That's all that people want when you're questioning why somebody may be kneeling, when you're seeing why someone may be marching in the street. They're not doing it just to cause a fuss. They're doing it because the sense of accountability has been lost in officer-involved shootings. And many people have tried to separate everyone by saying because you want accountability, you're against law enforcement. But we don't buy that. I don't buy that. We respect and love the police officers that are out there every day risking their lives. And they are. If you hate every police officer, then you're the problem. But there's also a problem that goes unseen, that many people acknowledge with a march or a kneel, that justice like this does not happen. That's all people want. No matter what color you are, no matter what sex you are, people want accountability. Because when you have none, you have hopelessness. You have apathy. You have anger. We have to get this type of justice because being a police officer is one of the most powerful jobs in the country and should be respected. But that doesn't mean you're above the law. That doesn't mean you can do as you please. As the Department of Justice said during this trial and today, no one is above the law. So if the death of Walter Scott, with all of the great reforms that have happened, can make the next officer think 1 second longer before pulling that trigger and changing an entire nation, then it was all worth it, and he would be happy with the results and the changes that happened. We don't all have to be separated or divided. All we have to do is listen and understand why someone is upset, why someone has to hold a picture like this, why they have to watch as normally the officer hugs their family and walks out of court smiling. Don't think that this was given to us just because there's a video. Videos do not get you justice anymore. Anger and bricks don't get you justice. Determination, prayer, faith, and being the forefront of a family like this and never giving up gets you justice. and holding the Department of Justice accountable, making sure they keep prosecuting, making sure your district attorneys fight and don't give up, or don't prosecute because the victim doesn't look like them. That's what gets you justice. It's been an honor for all this time to represent this family, and proud of the history that was made today. Ms. Judy Scott would like to say some words.
This is the day that the Lord has made, and I am rejoicing, and I'm glad in it. I thank and I praise God for each and every one of you all. I thank God for all the prayers that went up for our family. I thank God for the attorneys. I just thank God for everything that He has done. My soul is rejoicing right now because of Jesus. I thank God that He was in our lives.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Scott. I'm the oldest brother of Walter Scott. At the beginning of this ordeal, the family would desire to get justice. We feel like we have gotten justice today. We feel that we have moved on. And not only did we get justice today, but the truth was told. And we did not believe the original report. We did not believe that. We did not trust that. But at the end of the day, God had a ram in the bush. And his name was Santana, who was brave enough to film this horrendous act that was done to my brother. Our family has changed in a way that we will never be the same again. But through the grace of God, we have come a long way. And we have come through the storm and through the tears, but we have not fallen. Our head are not bowed, but we are head held high and proud to be here today and still seeking justice for Walter. And the process, other families may not receive this, but we have set a roadmap for them to follow, to believe in God and try to keep the peace. We thank Charleston for keeping the peace. We thank the United States for keeping peace. And we do it the right way. And we may have not gotten enough time that we think that might be suitable, but we got time. And this is the first, and it's historical. And we did it all the right way. All the I's was crossed, all the our I's was dotted, all the T's were crossed. And we are very thankful and grateful for being able to be at this moment today. And we do thank God, and we thank everybody that had a part in this. And these gentlemen has been here with us from the beginning, Chris Stewart and Justin Bamberg. They have been the family attorneys, and we've been connected with the state and DOJ. And we really do appreciate them coming in. And I thought it would have been over sooner than now, but it's been a long ride for my family. And we've had a lot of heartache, a lot of crying, and we've seen our brother run and die many a times. And that can never stop and that can never change. But we find the victory. It says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy will come in the morning. And this is just a start to our joy. And we thank God for that. Thank you.
And next, Faden Santana will speak, who this wouldn't have happened without him.
That's right. Amen.
Hello, my name is Faden Santana. Today, I know there's a victory for justice, there's a victory for the Walter Scott family, and for many other members of the community and the nation. It's not a victory for Michael Slager family, which is also not my victory, because I don't feel happy for the situation that that another human being have to go through. I wish, you know, that this will never have to happen. I wish he never had to take that bad decision that he did, that today I know that he regretted, and also his family. But I believe that sometimes sacrifice have to happen in order to make changes. And this is a big example. I hope that citizens and law enforcement can just see this journey as an example, and that we can respect our law enforcement. The law enforcement can respect our citizens. Can we as a human can respect human life? That we don't came to this world to destroy each other. We came to love each other. And that's all I can say. It's not easy. It's not easy, like I say, to the Scott family. I have been always neutral in this journey. My only side have only been justice and the truth. But changes have to come through sacrifice, and I just want to say that this sacrifice, you know, can remark our position, our history, and everything, so we can come along as a community, as a nation, as human beings. Thank you.
And Justin and Rodney.
Good afternoon. My name is Rodney Scott. I'm the younger brother of Walter Scott. A songwriter wrote a song, said, "We have come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord." And that's exactly what we did 2.5 years ago. We started at the beginning trusting in the justice system, and today we made history, getting justice. My heart goes out to all the families that didn't get justice. And there's still a lot of work to be done in the justice system. But we can be thankful today, the Scott family. And hopefully it sets a platform for the future that all families will get the justice that they're still desiring to get. And I'm thankful for the justice system that worked on our behalf: Chris Stewart, Justin Bamberg, Scarlett Wilson, Eric Fishman. They did a wonderful job. The Scott family is pleased. I want the world to know that the Scott family is pleased. We got justice. And like I said, I hope that every other family that's still trying to get justice will get justice for their families. Thank you again.
And last comment, and then we'll take some questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've kind of heard by everything that can be said. My name is Justin Bamberg, one of the attorneys for the family, also a state representative here in South Carolina. 20 years is a long time, and it's a long time to think about this. And during sentencing today, Rodney, Walter's brother, stood up in court and pulled this out of his pocket. It's a light bulb. And it's important to remember how we got here. And we got here over this. A light bulb. A man lost his life after his vehicle was stopped for a taillight. And what we've got to do, yes, this is a sense of justice here, but the fight for justice can't stop here. Is he damaged this community, he damaged law enforcement, he damaged family lives, but he set us back. His actions set us back even further. And we've got to fix that. It's on government to step in and make sure that law enforcement officers are trained appropriately. It's on government to make sure that they step in and they fund local departments so they have the resources that they need, so that these officers are paid what they need. It's on us to hold government accountable. Get out and vote. Make sure you have people in place who don't want another Walter Scott. They don't want to see another mother have to stand up in front of the world, right, and lead them by faith. They don't want to see another brother have to stand up and talk about how night after night after night he receives his brother getting shot in the back. And they don't want another officer's family, another 1-year-old, to realize that for 20 years he's going to have to see his father behind a piece of glass. So yes, this is a good day, but this is only the beginning. So thank you all very much.
Anthony,
Take a few questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, Anthony, a question for you and Rodney, both of you are Walter's brothers. Have you two, in your hearts, been able to forgive Michael Slager for shooting and killing your brother?
To answer your question, yes, sir, I have been able to forgive Michael Slager for killing my brother. And only until I had gotten forgiveness for him was I able to move forward. And after receiving that forgiveness for him, I was able to go forward with my life and have peace of mind, peace in my heart.
What about you, Rodney?
I have. Like I said at the beginning, you know, I had to forgive because God is forgiving to us. So I never changed my thoughts or my feelings since day one.
Judy, could we ask you the same question? And at the same time, when we're talking about forgiveness, I'm also guessing you guys don't want us to get it twisted. That, you know, while you forgive him, you still hold him accountable.
Oh,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Judy, can you speak to that?
Yes, we are held accountable for our actions. And I did forgive him at the beginning because of the love of Christ in me and because God forgave me. I had to examine myself because the forgiveness came so easily. But I thank God, having a background like I did.
At the same time, though, I'm guessing that you, while you forgive, you still don't want anyone to forget. But that doesn't mean you absolve him. Or am I putting words in your, am I making those words up for you?
To answer your question, and our forgiveness, the forgiveness does not say that us as a family do not want justice. We wanted justice for my brother. And not only did we want justice for my brother, but we wanted the truth to come out. And through the whole entire ordeal, there was a story that was told that there was a vicious fight. That my brother grabbed the taser. We as a family never believed that. We as a family never took the word of the officer at the time. And we are hurt. And we do have some type of passion for the Slager family, and that they have to suffer as well, and we do forgive Michael Slager for what he did, but yes, we did want justice for my brother, and we feel like we have gotten a sense of justice. It can't bring him back, it can't bring Walter back, but justice for what was done to him, and for all the days we have to watch him running over and over again, running for his last time and being gunned down and shot in his back.
Mr. Scott, 2.5 years after Slager shot your son, you took responsibility for that in court today. Was that important for you to hear?
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, ma'am, 2.5 years after he shot your son, Slager took responsibility for shooting him in court today. Was that important for you to hear that as a mother?
Yes, it was, but it was a little late hearing it because it took so long. I guess it takes some people that long to come to themselves, but I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I can answer
and
that.
I'd like to thank Also, I can't forget those that were there from the beginning, like Elder Johnson and Elder Rivers and Dixon and all them that was there by my side the whole time. I praise God for them.
I know that you said that the fight is not over, and even though you guys were able to get justice for Walter Scott, your brother, that the fight's not over for others around the nation. What are you guys going to do to be a voice for change?
Well, absolutely. We're going to support the teams that were trying to fight for families, other families that did not get justice. There's still a whole lot of work to be done as far as civil rights, family that has sons that has been shot and still not getting justice. So, I mean, like I said, it's a lot of work to be done, and we're definitely going to support because they supported us. And to answer his question, all the false narratives that were going on repeatedly for the past 2.5 years, and then every day we sat in court this week, we watched the film of my brother being shot, and it was fast forwarded, slowed down, frozen, and just to hear the gunshots. I mean, we relived 2.5 years ago this week, and when Michael Slager got up for the first time, because in my mind I said, wow, he never said sorry, he never showed any emotions, but today he did. Whether he meant it or not, he did. He apologized to the family. He called each and every last one of our names in court today and apologized. So who are we not to forgive? We're all human, and whether he meant it or not, he said it. So it's whether we want to accept it or not. I accept it. I'm sure my family has, and we want to move on. You see, this is a new beginning. Okay, so today sets a new beginning. We hope we set the tone for the entire world. We have to move on. My brother will never come back. We'll never ever see him again. I'm gonna have my days. I'm gonna hurt. My family's gonna hurt. Family reunions, birthdays, celebrations. We're gonna hurt, but we still have to move on.
As painful as that video has been for all of y'all to watch and have to relive those moments over and over, Chris, Justin, do you think that we would have gotten the sentence that we got today without that video being out so early?
Of course not. You have to understand one of the biggest things from the Walter Scott tragedy is you saw an officer kill someone and then move the taser next to the body to fit a story
narrative
that he had concocted in his head that he knew the media would just accept. He knew the public would just accept. He knew his supervisors would accept. And so now it simply can tell you maybe the person did not have a gun.
That's right.
Maybe the police department immediately coming out and saying this person was a drug dealer or alleged drug dealer or a criminal or a whatever the narrative is in these cases. That's done to make you all not like them. You all at home watching, it's to make you say, oh, their life doesn't matter as much because they were probably a drug dealer or they're black or they're poor or whatever it may be. That's what this shows you, is that you can't believe the initial narrative. You have to have someone that investigates these cases. We didn't even know the tape existed when we took this case.
That's right.
We took it because I didn't think a 50-something-year-old black man with a great family would attack a cop. I just didn't think it. I didn't believe that. So you can't believe the narratives. Investigate. If the cop didn't do anything wrong, great. He walks away. But if he did something wrong, simply hold him accountable. It's just simple.
One more question.
Can I ask, what message do you think that this sentencing would send to law enforcement in communities of color?
Stop and think, or you can end up 20 years behind bars. You won't just get away every time. You can't just take a life that easy. You can't write them off as, oh, it's a poor black person or a poor white person or whatever it may be, and write them off saying that everyone's going to cover for you. The media is now looking into these situations. There's been reporters we've been working with that have been on this thing constantly. People are watching, and people are starting to actually care. And if they're not caring, they're being forced to care because people are demonstrating and making you pay attention. So that's what this lesson is about, is you have to just make sure that your first duty is protecting life and not easily taking it.
Thank you very much. Let's walk this way.
All right, you've been listening to a news conference by the family of Walter Scott, and I was struck by what Mrs. Scott, Judy Scott, Walter's father, said at the beginning. She was clutching, holding firmly to a picture of her son, Walter Scott, and she said, "This is the day the Lord has made, and I am rejoicing in it." Also, in answer to my question, both Anthony Scott, Walter's brother, and Rodney Scott, another brother, said they found it in their hearts to forgive Michael Slager for shooting and killing their brother, Walter Scott. Harv Jacobs, our police reporter. Harv, this has been an extraordinary day, and it touches my heart how forgiving, and I know I've said this before, but how forgiving Judy Scott is of Michael Slager for what he did to her son.
She's a Christian woman, Bill. That's why she forgave him. Other stuff that stood out for me from the press conference when Attorney Justin Bamberg held up that brake light. $1.82. He said all this over a brake light. And also Chris Stewart, the other attorney, said he took the case before they knew about the video of the cell phone, because he in his gut he knew something was wrong. So, yeah.
And then Phaedon Santana, the young man who took the video, the infamous video, which changed this whole case around, was rather soft-spoken, but he said in court, this was abuse.
And he also said today he wished this didn't have to happen at the press conference.
We all wish this didn't have to happen. This young lady right here, Harv, let's get her in. She went to school with Walter Scott. Thank you for coming in. What is your name?
My name is Trudy Lucas Grant.
Well, Trudy, good to have you with us.
Thank you so
went
much.
to school with Walter?
Yes, sir, I sure did. All throughout high school and all throughout middle school.
Well, tell me about Walter Scott. A lot of us don't know much about him.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about Walter Scott? God rest his soul.
Walter was mild-mannered. He was funny. He was charming. He was just an all-around nice guy. Nothing ever changed about Walter. We never knew when he was having a bad day or if he had a bad day. But we all, with this phenomenon of Facebook, we will all be able to reconnect. And my last post I got from Walter was, "Trudy, how you doing? You look great." I said, "Thank you, Walter," not knowing that would be the last communication I would have with my dear friend.
So when you found out that your dear friend, as you call him, had been shot dead, what was your reaction? You had to be horrified.
I was in disbelief. And it just so happened we were visiting another friend of ours that was in the hospital that day. And we heard the news. And somebody said, "Oh my God, that's Walter." And we all said, "Walter Scott? Could not be. That's not the Walter we knew." The way they painted him and the way they portrayed him on that day, that was not the Walter Scott we knew.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your time and sort of informing us about what this man Walter Scott was all about and what he was like.
Yeah, and one last statement.
Yes, ma'am.
For everybody that went to school with him, for the St. Andrews High School Rocks, we got justice for Walter.
You know what? I'm a graduate of St. Andrews too, and I'm a rock, and you got justice for Walter.
Yes, we did.
Thank you, my dear.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for your time. Debbie, I cannot hear you. I have lost... my earpiece is not working with you, but you've seen the news conference. You heard this young lady who went to high school with Walter Scott at St. Andrews, where I graduated from high school. So I'm going to throw it back to you right now and say it's been an extraordinary week, and it has finally ended. 20 years in federal prison for Michael Slager. The Scott family, from the mother Judy to the brothers Rodney and Anthony, all of them say we have forgiven Michael Slager for what he did to in Judy's case, her son, and in Rodney and Anthony's case, their brother. I'll throw it back to you, Debbie, in the studio.
And their attorney starting off the bat, saying it's an historic day in civil rights. I'm here with Charlie Condon, former state attorney general. Let's talk a little bit about this 20-year sentence. You say that this is a precedent.
I believe so. Police officers accused of crimes with improper shootings or illegal shootings. I've got to think this is one of the more stricter or harsher sentences out there. I think that is correct. Now, how we got there, I do think from a legal standpoint, is really fascinating because, of course, we had the state court trial. That resulted in a hung jury mistrial. The jurors apparently afterwards said that we could not find him, and would not find him guilty of murder. We were only discussing manslaughter.
Right.
It then goes over to federal court for prosecution for deprivation of civil rights under law, under color of law, which is a federal offense that carries from 0 to life. And what is so interesting to me from this legal standpoint is the whole discussion of second-degree murder versus manslaughter arises in the context of the federal sentencing guidelines. When you look at the federal sentencing guidelines for the deprivation of civil rights, you're required to look at and score what's called the underlying offense, which in this case, it either would have been manslaughter or second-degree murder.
But they had decided earlier to recommend manslaughter, but that's not where the judge went with
Yes, and that's the other, to me, again, it's the government here, hats off to them, because their presentation must have been compelling, because one thing to note that I think is really important, the standard of proof at the sentencing hearing level would only be preponderance. That is more likely than not. It's a much lower standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but still, Judge Norton disagreed with the impartial arm of the court, the probation department, that called it manslaughter. And he ruled, and just technically, not to split hairs here, but I do think it's important from a legal standpoint, this defendant, Slager, was not found guilty of second-degree murder. He was found guilty of the deprivation of civil rights under color of law. That's what he's found guilty of. He pled to that. But there was a finding by Judge Norton beyond by preponderance of the evidence standard only, that the underlying offense, that what he did when the shooting occurred, and to me this is very noteworthy, he found that this was second-degree murder. And if you look at the definition of second-degree murder under the federal law, it's got basically the same standards as the state court murder, which is unlawful killing with malice aforethought. It doesn't involve premeditation, malice aforethought. So Judge Norton is calling this second-degree murder. And so once he did that, the range for sentencing jumped up dramatically, and hence this very, very strict, I would say, given where we stood. Because again, the defense had, going into the sentencing hearing, the defense had a recommendation by the probation department of no more than 13 years.
Right. He essentially doubled that sentence. We are going to talk shortly in a few minutes about whether or not he's able to appeal this sentence. But first, we're going to go back out to the federal courthouse in Harv Jacobs. Harv.
Hi, Debbie. I have State Representative Wendell Gilliard here with me. Wendell, you watched the press conference with the family. What was your reaction to what they said?
Well, definitely. The family never ceased to amaze me. I applauded them all through this, process here because of the fact that they stood out, they talked from the bottom of their heart, and they understood one thing, that we need to keep moving forward in spite of. We have work to do. And so that, I give them their accolades.
They forgave Michael Slager. You agree with that?
Yes, of course. And I think we need to understand that as we keep progressing in our communities, moving forward, we have to have a sense of forgiveness, because that's the only way we're going to make progress. Okay? But the bottom line is we have work to do. We need more people who want to participate than we have. We've got too many critics. We need people out here getting committed and getting involved. Okay? Because the message I'm taking away from this 4 days of coming out here, that we are moving forward, and we're going to take these type of incidents, and we're not going to hate, okay? Because we should not hate our law enforcement. We shouldn't hate our citizens, whether they be black or white. Nobody has a right to lose their lives because of the color of their skin. We have to understand that, okay? And we have to prove that day in and day out as we progress in our lives.
Do you think this will change the way police departments operate?
Sure. You look at the first step with the body cameras when I first introduced the body cameras. Now that's law. But the body cameras was never a solve-all, okay? Because I put a statement behind that look, with this law, we need to be more committed, more involved in our communities. We need to get out and vote, and quit being critics. Okay, that's the only way we're going to make change, Harv. So we won't have another this type of incident.
Thank you, Wendell. Appreciate it. Okay, Debbie, we're going to send it back to you.
Harv, thank you. It's interesting to note that one of the brothers of Walter Scott, Anthony Scott, said, "We got time. This is a first. It is historical." Bill Sharp is standing by live with both brothers, Anthony and Rodney. Bill?
This is Anthony Scott, and this is his brother Rodney, and we appreciate both of them joining us this afternoon. Anthony, let me start with you. It's all over.
Yes, sir. So far, it's all over, and we do appreciate coming to the point where the officer has received 20 years in federal prison. And I think this might be one of the first in the country. And this was a joint effort. And we want to thank the people in the community as well. And we were Charleston strong. We remain strong. And we believed and we trusted and we continued to believe in God. And he did it. He did it.
Rodney, were you expecting a sentence from Judge David Norton of 20 years in prison for Michael Slager? Were you expecting that?
Well, exactly. I really didn't know what to expect. I mean, he was kind of hard to read, during the week. I mean, you could see he was showing some sort of emotion, but we weren't sure exactly what the outcome was going to be, until today. Because he heard both sides. He heard testimonies from the Scott family and as well as the Slager family. They both gave impact statements. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of hard to balance which way is going to swing. But thank God, we got 20 years. We have to be thankful for that.
Are you satisfied with that?
I wanted more, but I can accept that.
You can accept it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anthony, your mother, I was talking about how extraordinary your mother, Judy, is.
Yes.
She said a while back, months ago, "I have forgiveness in my heart for Michael Slager for what he did to my son Walter," your brother and your brother. And now that forgiveness is also coming from you and Rodney. Tell me about that.
Well, I had to forgive Michael Slager so that I could move on with my life. It was actually had me held down. It was actually holding me down. My heart could not move any further. And until I could bring myself to forgive him, I could not move any further. And when I did that, I had a release. And that release was that it didn't matter what happened from that point on. I forgive the man that I saw gun my brother down, and the repeated murder that I have to see over and over again. It was all better from my heart.
The power of forgiveness, Anthony and Rodney, is awesome. I heard you on the witness stand said, "I've seen that video at least 1,000 times. Yes. I have cried and cried and cried." Mm-hmm. And yet you have found forgiveness in your heart, too, for Michael Slager.
Yes, sir. At the beginning it was tough, but I'll be honest with you, hearing it come from Mom, and, she's the matriarch of our family. And hearing that come from my mother, I said, if my mother has to forgive, and she's going to forgive, who am I not to forgive? So I had to search myself and said, you know what? To bring some peace within myself, I have to do that. That's the only way we can move on, is to forgive. And like I said, today was the first day he actually came out and apologized to the family. Because I was waiting to hear that from day one. When is he going to show some sort of emotion and be apologetic for what he did? He did a terrible thing. He made an awful decision. And like I said, I don't hold other police officers accountable for what he did. He did it himself, you see. And all policemen are bad. You see what I'm saying? So now that he has apologized and he's gotten his sentence, now we can move on with our lives. But at the same time, we must never forget, Walter will never, ever come back.
You will never
ever see him again.
Anthony, one final comment. What message does this send not only to the Low Country where we are, but to the rest of the country about what happened here and about justice being served? What message does this send, do you think?
Well, it was a good thing that the DLG came aboard, and the sentencing guidelines were a little bit different. and the Senate. He had a tremendous defense team. His defense team they just brought about points that would make you believe something that you did not see, make you believe something that you did not hear. And when you're dealing with a jury of 12 people, that's easy to be convinced of something that's not actually happened that did happen. So we are very grateful as a family, and to the country and to other people, we have to let justice play its part.
Let justice play its part.
Yes.
Anthony, thank you so much for your time. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Rodney, thank you for your time, too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Let's go now to Harv Jacobs. He's out here with me outside the federal courthouse. Harv?
Bill, I have Pastor Thomas Dixon of the Coalition with me. Pastor Dixon, what was your reaction to the 20-year sentence?
The family. Let me just say the family first off. They were satisfied with the sentence. They feel as if justice was served in that, and so I agree definitely with what they agreed on. I would love to have seen a stiffer sentence. I would have loved to have seen life without possibility of parole, but I'll take the 20 years. So at least in this case, even though we had to go all the way to federal court in order to see justice served, we couldn't bring it home in South Carolina. But today is a great day because we had a law enforcement officer who clearly committed murder. Convicted and sentenced to 20 years.
Where do we go from here, in your opinion, when it comes to police relations with the community?
I think we need to be more open and honest as far as our law enforcement addressing their internal issues. I think that there needs to be more emphasis on officers not covering up situations like that blue wall of silence. It needs to be eliminated. We're at a junction. We're at a crucial junction where we can move forward and really bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. If law enforcement embraces the fact that they made some serious mistakes in this situation by trusting their blue wall system. It's time now for that truth and that honesty to rise to the surface, that will put a trust back into the community with law enforcement. We can use this as that launch pad for it.
The family forgave Michael Slager. The right thing?
Right thing. Definitely right thing. Of course, forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't seek justice. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you forget, because they're never going to forget that. For every holiday that they have, every birthday, the sons as they get older, they're going to have an empty seat at their table, a seat that was designated for Walter Scott, for Lamar, as his mother calls him, and they'll never be able to overcome that. So yes, forgive. That's first and foremost, because it frees the family up from the pain that they would harbor. They're basically held hostage to Michael Slager. But in forgiving now, they can move forward as a family, but they'll never be able to forget, and the pain will still be there. It might lessen over time, but it's going to be there. So we as a community need to continue to embrace that and to work to do better. I think that their moving forward will be better if they see us as a community beginning to really work seriously as bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community and working together in order to prevent anything like that from happening again.
And one more question. You and your organization, NAN, you call for peace after this.
Yes.
Look at it out here. It's
yes.
All these cops, and it's peaceful, no problem.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about. And until we all preach peace, that's the only real aspect of life that we can really live for. All of this confusion we live in, the hatred that we harbor and carrying on, until we overcome that, this is not going to be a good place. That's not the world that we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have a world that's beyond all of that. So the more that the hatred, the violence, the confusion is crushed to the ground, the more peace will rise. So we have to keep fighting the good fight. And I appreciate you for fighting that fight.
Thank you, Pastor Dixon. Great to see you. Pastor Thomas Dixon,
really
thank you. Debbie, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Harv. We have with us a statement that just came in from Solicitor Scarlett Wilson, and she said, and I quote, "In my closing argument of the state's case against Michael Slager, I called upon the jury to name it, to decide what to call Michael Slager's crime. They could or would not. A fair and impartial judge has given the final word. After hearing important evidence, the Honorable David Norton gave it a name, second-degree murder." She goes on to say the vast majority of police officers are excellent public servants, but she ends by saying, we give police officers an incredible amount of power. With that great power comes great accountability. If we do not hold officers accountable for their crimes, our criminal justice system will fall apart, and we
14 days to make that decision. It goes to the Fourth Circuit.
Do you think he will?
I would think, given the length of the sentence and the fact that the probation scored it as manslaughter, I would think that he would. Now, having said that, he's got a really tough row to hoe. The standard of proof is just this preponderance of evidence standard.
Right.
Judge Norton is an extremely experienced judge. He also has this state court background, prosecution background. He did serve in that capacity, and I think he would clearly understand what's required from an evidentiary standpoint to prove second-degree murder. So I have confidence. I've always had confidence in this process, particularly given the judge that we had. And so I do think that the finding would be upheld on appeal. But it would not surprise me at all if Defendant Slager does appeal.
Would his basic apology to the family impact that appeal?
The wording sounded okay to me from that standpoint. I don't think he made any admissions in that apology that would affect his appeal. So no, I think he's okay on that front.
When he does go to prison, and I'm assuming that he is heading right now to federal prison,
typically the way this does work, and he may be given some special consideration, I don't know, but he has been housed at the Charleston County Detention Facility. I think they have a compact with the federal government to house federal prisoners. And so now his next step would be a federal facility. I'm assuming, and again, this is Bureau of Prisons, it's a vast bureaucracy. I've got to think, given his previous occupation and the type of sentence that we have here and the notoriety of this case, that his personal safety is going to be paramount. Now, where that ends up placing him, I do not know, but I've got to think they're going to be really worried about that.
meaning he could be in danger in prison.
I would think he would be in extreme danger. Again, you've got somebody who has been now convicted in effect of this unlawful killing of a private citizen.
And he's a police officer, a former police officer.
The tape's been played out there innumerable times across really the world. He's going to go into the federal system. I would think the name Slager would ring a bell with many folks. And our prisons, generally speaking, are dangerous. Now, having also said that, I do think for him to be in the federal system is by far a safer place than our state system. We have a wonderful director in Brian Sterling with our Department of Corrections, but I would not want to be in charge of keeping Defendant Slager safe in our state prisons. I would think it'd be easier in the federal system.
All right, we're going to go back out to the federal courthouse. Bill Sharp and Harv Jacobs downtown.
Debbie, Chris Stewart is one of the attorneys for Walter Scott's family. What's your reaction, Chris, to the verdict that came down today, to the sentencing of 20 years for Michael Slager, no parole in the federal pen? What do you think?
It's reassuring for the community and for the nation that there is accountability. You know, you don't see it often. And it's a good message that just because you hold an officer accountable doesn't mean you don't support law enforcement.
Were you expecting 20 years, really, Chris, or were you expecting less or more? What were your expectations?
I never know what to expect because a lot of times it's not about the facts of the case. It's emotion or fearing that sentencing an officer to time in jail means that you don't support law enforcement and so you don't do the right thing. This judge did the right thing.
So where do we go from here, Chris?
Hopefully this will be a blueprint out there that accountability is out there when someone is murdered, as Walter Scott was, and that you need to just take a second longer to decide on your actions when someone is fleeing or running away. It's very difficult to be a police officer, extremely difficult. And wanting accountability doesn't mean you don't support them.
Do your thoughts, too, go out to Michael Slager's young family as well?
Of course. They didn't do anything wrong. They're suffering also. That's why it's not a emotional win for anyone, because no one can win. Walter can't come back, and his family is in pain.
Rodney Scott said on the witness stand today, more or less, thank goodness for that video by Faden Santana. Without that, Michael Slager would be back on the job today. That video was pretty important.
It was massively important. I mean, it showed an officer moving the taser next to the body. We would have believed the first narrative without it.
Chris Stewart, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Take care.
You too.
Chris Stewart, one of the attorneys for the Scott family, Walter Scott's family. Well, it's all over here at the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston, but we've got some more reaction coming in. We're going to wrap this all up, show you what's happened for the past 4 days. There have been a lot of tears, a lot of testimony, a lot of anger, and now some of that has been resolved with this verdict, the sentencing of 20 years for Michael Slager. You have seen the video which horrified so many people of Michael Slager drawing his gun and shooting Walter Scott in the back. He fired 8 bullets, 5 of them hit Walter Scott. Now we can start to put some of this behind us, and we'll go forward from here. I'm Bill Sharp, and I'm live here at the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. Michael Slager will now begin serving 20 years in the federal penitentiary. We don't know yet where he will go. We know he'll be evaluated first, and then they will decide where to put him somewhere in this country. When we learn where that will be, of course, we'll bring it to you. I'm Bill Sharp, Live 5 News, live at the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. Our coverage will continue right here, coming up at 4. I'll see you then.
Sensational singer with hits like Fight Song and Broken